All right, Ryan, I'm really curious to get to this next block because it's an issue you've been covering very closely. The Intercept has been covering very closely. Let's talk about everything unfolding as you have you have Herzog from Israel coming to Washington, D.C. this week, and the Squad reacting, and then establishment Democrats reacting to the Squad reaction. Break it down for us.
Well, I mentioned that Daniel Bogasaw was at that New Hampshire event, the No Labels event on Monday. We also had him out at Netroots on Saturday for this moment where, so we'll play this clip. This is, you've got Representative Jan Schakowsky of Illinois and Primila Jayapal of Washington, the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. They're on stage at Netroots Nation in Chicago, which is a gathering of kind of progressive operatives. They start getting protested over Israel and specifically over Schakowsky not being on a bill that would bar the use of U.S. money to detain Palestinian children. It evolved/devolved into this.
I'll just leave. Maybe I should just walk off.
Guys,
can I say something? Can I say something as somebody that's been in the streets and has participated in a lot of demonstrations? I want you to know that we have been fighting to make it clear that Israel is a racist state, that the Palestinian people deserve self-determination and autonomy, that the dream of a two-state solution is slipping away from us, that it does not even feel possible. It does not even feel possible. And I want you to know that while you may have arguments with whether or not some of us on stage are fighting hard enough, I do want you to know that there is an organized opposition on the other side, and it isn't the people that are on this stage.
What is her staff doing letting her go to Netroots Nation? Because this is exactly from like the perspective of your communications people you don't want to have happen, is her get up on the stage, start getting booed at Netroots, which is way more lit than CPAC in terms of like boos and audience engagement, and then start riffing and get yourself into this situation. Now, you have a take on how other people reacted to this, and not just a take, but reporting on it too.
But yeah, you've seen a lot of politicians get tripped up by Netroots. I think famously you had Martin O'Malley. I think when he was running for president, said, got protested and said all lives matter, and it's like, oh, problem.
Not the right place to say that.
No, don't say that there. Bernie Sanders got protested at a Netroots.
Everyone does.
And he just did his very grumpy thing. If you don't want me up here, I'll just get out of here. What do you, leave me alone. Like, you invited me here, now you're yelling at me. Come on. And so you've got to be prepared for these moments. And so Jayapal told the New York Times that as soon as she stepped off stage, that phrase, racist state, which is blunt, was rattling around in her head, and she's like, "Oh, that's not going to go well." She's in a difficult spot because it is a state that has ministers in it who are proudly racist. One of them was convicted previously of inciting racism and supporting terrorism against Palestinians. Like literally a minister in the government. They say racist things all the time. They have a explicitly ethno-nationalist orientation that gives rights to citizens based on their ethnicity and their religion. You have half the population living under the control of the country that doesn't have rights, and you have another half that does have rights. And so, what is that? She described it in that moment as a racist state. If we can put this up and you can pause it and read the whole thing, I won't read the entire thing, but here's her clarification of what she meant, where what she's basically saying here is that she doesn't believe that Zionism equals racism, and that she doesn't believe that the state is fundamentally, intrinsically, from the day it was born, racist, but that its practices, currently are. So that, of course, is not satisfactory to the people who are calling for her head and calling for her to, I guess, apologize more and more. And so they pushed a resolution onto which we can talk about later. They pushed a resolution onto the House floor yesterday, which came a day before Isaac Herzog, the president of Israel, which is different than the prime minister, is coming to address the Congress. You have most of the Squad members saying that they're going to boycott this speech by Herzog. Here we have, I think, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez being asked if she plans on attending.
Will you attend his address tomorrow?
I will not be attending. There's currently a crisis of democracy in apartheid. And I think that this is something that has been a consensus.
Now, the resolution is one of the wildest things I've seen put into the hopper in my time covering Congress. If we can put up the text of it. That's a little small. We'll have a bigger one for you later. But basically, you don't need to read it. I'll tell you all three things that it says. Interestingly, it condemns anti-Semitism and xenophobia. I was wondering if any Republicans would be like, wait a minute, we're against xenophobia now? Wait, are we condemning Trump here? What's going on here? It says, then the third one, it says, we will always support Israel. Always. Israel's like, we could even invade Ukraine, and you'll still support us? Like,
really?
Always. It's unconditional. We will always in the future support Israel. And then it says, Israel is not a racist or apartheid state. Now, you know why they put racist in there, because that's the word that Jayapal used. They slip in apartheid there because they know that everybody's now going to vote for this thing. And it led to a whole bunch of jokes saying, I'm not a racist or apartheid state T-shirt is raising a lot of questions that I thought were answered by my T-shirt. And to me, anytime that you are pushing the House to just straight up declare that you are not something, that you are not a racist state, you're not an apartheid state, you might have some problems that are not going to be sorted out by the House just declaring it. I was talking to a reporter up on the Hill, and I told him this afternoon they're going to vote on Israel not being an apartheid state. And the reporter's like, but it is. It's like, no, but the House is saying it's not.
Well, okay, so also then the Biden administration comes in, because again, this is all happening, as you mentioned, in the context of the speech that AOC...
And Herzog meeting with Biden. And
right, and AOC, it wasn't just AOC, it was other squad members.
Bowman, Tlaib, Omar. And in Omar and Tlaib's defense, let's be clear, Israel does not allow Omar or Tlaib into the country.
Yes.
They're members of Congress elected by 700,000 Americans each, and they're not allowed to go into the country. So Israel has no right to complain if they don't feel like showing up for that speech.
So we obviously disagree on this issue, and we've had this conversation many times. I think that where Jayapal actually walks back the racist statement, as you pointed out, that's where her kind of reservations and where she pulls back is really interesting, because to the point about Omar, for instance, when you use the word racist, and when you invoke apartheid, as you mentioned, it's sort of the rights that are given, taken, et cetera, in Israel are not based on race. They're based on religion. And that is, it has implications, obviously, for ethnicity and race in Israel and in Palestine, obviously. But whether it's baked into the state itself, racial policies, I think objectively, no. And that's where I have a really hard time invoking apartheid. There are Palestinian Arabs that serve in the Israeli parliament. There are plenty of people in Israel with different backgrounds, racial backgrounds, and I think specifically invoking race, and then Jayapal realizing specifically invoking race and walking it back. I feel like I'm in a weird position of agreeing with Primila Jayapal at Netroots Nation as she's getting booed, but I actually think it's not so much that I agree with her, it's that I think actually where she walks back is where the meat of that debate is. And it's so rare we start to talk about actually the center of the debate or the real thing at question, and actually that's what's happened in this conversation.
Yeah, and there's probably some elements of it that get lost in translation between American culture and Israeli culture, in the sense that, race and racism is has such a specific constructed meaning in the United States.
Yes.
It's like the absolute worst thing you can say to anybody. You've got Tommy Tuberville being like, well, they're white nationalists, but don't you dare call them racist.
They're Americans.
Like, and unless you're in the United States and in that conversation, you hear somebody like Tuberville say something like that, and they sound like a completely insane person. What do you mean white nationalism isn't racism? And where are you coming up with this? But understanding that mindset that cordons off that one term from everything else, it helps to explain why it's like, whoa. Because if you're a Palestinian living under this occupation, going through 4 checkpoints on your way to school, being taunted, having dogs nipping at you, the kind of academic debate between whether that you're a victim of racism or you're a victim of some kind of ethno-nationalist bigoted stew that is just producing this toxicity is like
that's upstream of racism.
It's upstream. It's like whatever it is, it just feels just awful to live under. And then you throw in the apartheid question. I asked a bunch of members of Congress yesterday on the Hill whether they thought it was an apartheid state, and some of them would say, "Well, look, Amnesty International says it is."
Yeah.
And they would just try to defer to Amnesty International and other human rights groups, including Bet Salam, an Israeli organization that says, yes, this is an apartheid state. Others would say no, because an apartheid state requires permanent control over people within its borders. Now, control over some of these areas is going on 75 years. But as long as they can kind of pretend that there's going to be some two-state solution in the future, then this is a temporary occupation rather than an apartheid government. But if you have lived and died your entire life under this quote-unquote temporary system, it's very hard for you to see the difference.
So we have a clip from the White House. This is D5. This is Karine Jean-Pierre reacting here.
The administration's new plan to counter anti-Semitism, as you all know, this past May, we announced a very comprehensive, once-of-a-kind anti-Semitism plan, which we think is incredibly important at this moment.
I think they just solved the problem.
Yes, they got an anti-Semitism plan.
It's good to know.
She was pressed a lot in that briefing about these questions, and she didn't really want to, because Democrats are in a difficult position. When Jayapal clarified her comments there, walked them back, then she gets hit from the left, saying, "Why don't you stand by that?"
Yeah.
Like you have people saying, "Why say it? It doesn't help us for you to say it in the first place if you're not going to stand by it." And so, in the same vein, the White House doesn't want to associate itself with that specific comment, but they also don't want to condemn her too hard, because then they get hit for being weak on it.
Right.
And so, and the idea that the House of Representatives is taking time out of its day for this three-part resolution is just so perfect.
In the White House as well.
And the White House is getting peppered about it, yeah.
So we also have this tear sheet from The Intercept. You've had an article here about Pervez Agwan, really, really interesting article about a bit of a case study here.
This is fascinating, yeah. So if you've been following our coverage, you know that in the 2022 cycle, AIPAC and its allied super PAC, or allied organization, Democratic Majority for Israel, they spent collectively close to $50 million in Democratic primaries, telling voters that these candidates were bad, and not mentioning Israel-Palestine, just focus grouping whatever they could about Donna Edwards. They spent $7 million against Donna Edwards in Prince George's County in Maryland, basically saying that she was bad at constituent service, like never once talking about the actual issue at hand, which is their differences on the question of Israel-Palestine. And so as a result, you had a lot of consultants advising their candidates, keep your head down on this issue and also other progressive issues, because supporting the Green New Deal and Medicare for All was becoming a proxy for AIPAC and DMFI for also being supportive of Palestinian rights. So not only would they back away from supporting Palestinian rights, they would also back away from issues that they thought might get them in the crosshairs of AIPAC and DMFI, because that amount of money in a primary is almost insurmountable. Mm-hmm. When you're like Donna Edwards was up by 30 points or so before they came in with $6 or $7 million and knocked her out of that race. Summer Lee, they came in the last 3 weeks and dropped millions. She got $1 million from outside, from like Justice Democrats and Working Families Party, and she was able to respond, and she wasn't on record in any way that could be kind of used against her in these attack ads. And so she survived, but only by like 4,000 points. If they had another 2 weeks, maybe they end up beating even Summer Lee, who voted against this resolution, by the way. So now you have an interesting development where this candidate in Houston, running against a pretty standard kind of center-right New Dem, AIPAC-endorsed Lizzie Fletcher in Houston, elected in 2018, it almost seems to be baiting AIPAC and DMFI to get into the race, because the district was redrawn by Republicans in Texas, and it's now about 75% non-white, with a significant Muslim population. A lot of Houston has a big Pakistani population in particular, but also other Muslim American populations. And so he's just straight up saying, Jayapal is getting attacked unfairly, and that he supports restricting aid to Israel, and that he basically ticks off every box that would get the attention of AIPAC and DMFI. And my sense is that he feels like this is a chance to test the question of if you actually run toward this issue rather than not mentioning it. Like most of the candidates would just try to not mention it. Like, you know what, make this an issue.
Yep.
My opponent is being funded by outside money organized by AIPAC. That's bad for democracy. That's bad for this district. I'm the anti-AIPAC candidate, and in a low turnout primary, if you can get people who that matters to turn out, maybe he can win. He's raised $300,000, so he's a credible candidate. So it'll be a real test case of whether or not you can actually run this way. Now, the question is, what kind of population do you need for that to work? So this is 75%, like I said, non-white. So that narrows the places where you can kind of run this strategy. But Houston and its suburbs is definitely potentially one of them.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's testing a political strategy that has a lot bigger implications. It's funny because we talk about this a lot on the right, especially when it comes to abortion, another one of those issues where every sort of establishment politician, like the equivalent of a Jayapal, feels like they're always between a rock and a hard place. You say one thing, you upset the base, you say another thing. It's a nightmare for them, especially when you throw in their donors and their fundraisers, et cetera. But there's this example of Ronald Reagan at an early CPAC. I want to say this is a CPAC phrase from maybe even the first CPAC. He talks about bold colors, not pale pastels. And especially on the left, a lot of people remember Ronald Reagan as being this sort of arch conservative, but he was a revolutionary. He completely remade the Republican Party. He was the tip of the spear of the remaking of the conservative, of creating the conservative movement, ushering it into the Republican Party at least. And he really firmly believed that your best political strategy is actually, in a lot of cases, the moral political strategy of just saying, here's what I believe, here's what I think it's a problem, and confronting things head on. So the abortion parallel to me really stood out when you were talking about, I think this hit my inbox last night from your Substack. That just stood out to me because I actually think it's something a lot of, especially centrist politicians, forget because they constantly have donors chirping in their ear. A lot of times voters just want to believe and trust that you're being honest with them and that they kind of know what you're going to do. And then they can make up their own judgment. Yeah. And that's not even like hackneyed. That really, like, people want to know that they can generally understand where you're coming from. And if you can pull that off, it's not easy if you're a politician because you want to lie about who's funding you and what you actually believe because you want to win. But sometimes even your most cynical attempt is not even your politically advantageous attempt.
Although the strategy is in some ways cynical, but to go to Reagan, it's an interesting case in that you want, as a politician, you want to elevate your least popular enemies so that you look kind of good in comparison to them. And Reagan did that all through California with the counterculture and the hippies. Oh, yeah. And in the 70s, the Republicans were calling it acid amnesty and abortion, and just trying to really tie the Democrats to this counterculture that people were, that the silent majority. I would have been part of that counterculture, so I'm not.
Yes.
But I'm not endorsing this opinion. But
I would
they
have
weren't
been beating you up.
You would have been, yeah. Your hard hat on, and hitting me with a monkey wrench, no doubt. And so he's kind of baiting attacks from the hippies,
right? So
that he can be like, look, the hippies don't like me, I must be good.
Totally.
And so Pervez Agwan is saying, look, AIPAC wants to destroy me, so therefore I must be good.
And the resolution, we have this from D6, did obviously, you'll be shocked to learn, pass. What's that, 412 to 9.
And one abstention. Yeah, you had Betty McCollum from Minnesota abstain, and then you had 9, which is basically the squad minus, I think, sometimes Becca Balint, Max Frost, Greg Kassar get talked about as kind of squad adjacent. They voted yes, but otherwise it's the people that you understand as like squad and squad adjacent voting no.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.